and welcome to the latest video on my top 1000 countdown. Now on this video we're going numbers 80 down to 71. So let us go to fighter number 80 now, and that fighter is Luis Manuel Rodriguez, one of the best welterweight and middleweight contenders and former welterweight champion. One of the best contenders in those weights from his era. So Luis Rodriguez, beat 6 world champions. He fought 170 rounds against champions, and he beat 2 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 101 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And Luis Rodriguez had a total of 45 fights against rated fighters. He scored 49 knockouts, 16 in 3 rounds or less, and 2 in the first round. Oh, good morning, Martin. You're going to catch it, mate, on third slide. Luis Rodriguez, was top 10 rated for 12 years. He had the longest unbeaten run of 35 fights, and Rodriguez himself was pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings for 6 years. Now Rodriguez had 15 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 8 wins. Oh, you're both here, so neither one of you are going to miss it on slide 3, is it? Slide 4? At least you're both here. Luis Rodriguez, he had 15 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 8 wins. Rodriguez scored 4 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 4 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Luis Rodriguez's opposition fought rate comes in at 6 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 5 from 13. So from 15 fights against champions, Rodriguez scored 8 wins with 7 losses, no draws, and 1 KO. Nearly half of those defeats there were to the great Emil Griffith alone. Against Hall of Famers, he had 8 fights, including 2 wins, 6 losses, no draws with 0 KOs. And Luis Rodriguez had 4 title fights, including 1 win, 3 losses, no draws, and no title defence. I know what's coming, I think. We'll see. So anyway, on to fighter number 79. Yes, it is slide 3. Cowboy Eddie Anderson, beat 3 world champions. He fought 172 rounds against champions, and he beat 3 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a total of 134 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Cowboy Eddie Anderson had 86 fights against rated fighters. 86, not a bad tally there. He scored 29 knockouts, 19 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 12 knockouts in the first round. Now, Cowboy Eddie Anderson was top 10 rated for 2 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 16 fights. Anderson, was never pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings. He did have 23 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 5 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 1 win against a pound for pound number 1 fighter. And his opposition fought rate, is 12 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 5 from 13. So interesting, his opposition fought rate is 12. His opposition beat rate is less than half that. Although, it's from 18, not 13. But you get me. So, on to fights against champions now. Eddie Anderson had 19, including 3 wins, 12 losses, 4 draws with 0 KOs. He had 15 fights against Hall of Famers, including 3 wins, 9 losses, 3 draw with 0 KOs. And Cowboy Eddie Anderson never had a world title fight. He did have 86 fights against rated fighters, but never got a world title fight. Plain ridiculous. So, on to number 78, is the great light heavyweight, John Henry Lewis. Hang on a minute. How come you two knew? So anyway, John Henry Lewis, beat 6 world champions. He fought 128 rounds against champions, and he beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a total of 89 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. And John Henry Lewis had 38 fights against rated opponents. He scored 56 knockouts, 33 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 11 knockouts in the first round. Now, Lewis was top 10 rated for 7 years. He had the longest unbeaten run of 21 fights, and he was pound for pound rated for 3 years. Now, John Henry Lewis had 13 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 8 wins. He scored 3 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And John Henry Lewis's opposition fought rate was 6 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 5 from 13. Do you remember way back in Countdown about 850 when I said, I'm telling you, they do go up at some point, because everyone were 1, 1, 2, 1, 2, 2, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1. So anyway, his opposition fought rate was 6 from 18. His opposition beat rate was 5 from 13. Now, John Henry Lewis had 15 fights against champions, including 9 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw with 3 knockouts. He had 10 fights against Hall of Famers, including 5 wins, 5 loss, no draw with 1 knockout. And John Henry Lewis had 7 title fights, including 6 wins, 1 loss, no draw, and 5 title defences. John Henry Lewis is a great light heavyweight fighter. The only title fight he lost there was actually when he'd gone up in weight and he challenged the Brown Bomber Joe Louis. He was actually unbeaten as a light heavyweight champion in title fights, and he is one of the underrated light heavyweight champions when people talk about top 10, top 15 light heavyweight champions. So there's John Henry Lewis, okay, in 78. When we go to fight at 77, okay, is the Express, the ferocious combination puncher and body puncher Billy Patrol, who could give many a great Hall of Famer difficult nights. Billy Patrol beat 6 world champions, okay, he fought 174 rounds against champions, and Patrol beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a total of 154 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Patrol had 46 fights against rated fighters. He scored 65 knockouts, 36 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 11 in the first round. And Patrol was top 10 rated himself for 7 years. He had a longest unbeaten run of 19 fights, and Patrol was pound for pound rated for 2 years. Now, Patrol had 20 fights against pound for pound fighters, scoring 7 wins. He scored 4 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters, and 3 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Billy Patrol's opposition fought rate comes in at 7 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 5 from 13. So Patrol had 17 fights against champions. That included 7 wins, 8 losses, 2 draws with 2 knockouts. He had 15 fights against Hall of Famers, including 5 wins, 9 losses, 1 draw with 2 knockouts. And Billy Patrol had 1 title fight that was a defeat. You know, when Billy Patrol in one of the Canzoneri fights, Canzoneri, it was the fight where Canzoneri put on such a great display that one of the writers after said, tonight Tony Canzoneri showed he could have fought any great lightweight from any era and stood in their company. Because I think sometimes Tony Canzoneri still to this day goes underrated, and with his accomplishments in title and resume and wins, he's ridiculous. But anyway, there's Billy Patrol in 77. When we go to fight number 76, okay, his former light heavyweight champion Joey Maxim. Now, Maxim beat 5 world champions. He fought 213 rounds against champions, and Maxim beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 218 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Maxim had over a half century of fights against rated fighters with a total of 56. He scored 22 knockouts, 5 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 1 knockout in the first round. And Maxim was top 10 rated as a fighter for 14 years. His longest unbeaten run was a run of 15 fights, and he was never pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings. Maxim did have 21 fights against pound for pound fighters, scoring 6 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Joey Maxim's opposition fought rate comes in at 6 from 18, and his opposition beat rate is 3 from 13. So Maxim had 18 fights against champions. That includes 5 wins, 13 losses, no draws with 2 knockouts. He had 19 fights against Hall of Famers, including 4 wins, 15 loss, no draw with 1 knockout. And he had 7 world title fights, including 3 wins, 4 losses, no draws and 2 title defences. So there's Joey Maxim in 76. When we go to fight at 75, okay, he's one of the great lightweight champions who originally titled at light welterweight before losing that and going down and becoming a multiple time lightweight champion and one of the great lightweight kings. Carlos Ortiz, okay, beat 5 world champions. He fought 146 rounds against champions, and Ortiz beat 5 Hall of Fame fighters and fought a total of 131 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, against rated fighters, Ortiz comes in with a total of 32. He scored 30 knockouts in his career, 14 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 3 knockouts in the first round. And Carlos Ortiz was top 10 rated for over a decade during his career, a total of 11 years. He had a longest unbeaten run of 26 fights, and Carlos Ortiz was pound for pound rated for 7 years in my all-time rankings. Now, against pound-for-pounders themselves, Ortiz had a total of 17 fights. That included 10 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound-for-pound top 3 fighters and 1 win against a pound-for-pound number 1 fighter. And his opposition fought rate comes in at 4 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 3 from 13. Now, Carlos Ortiz had 14 fights against champions, including 8 wins, 5 loss, 1 draw, with 5 knockouts. He had 13 fights against Hall of Famers, including 8 wins, 4 losses, 1 draw, with 4 knockouts. And Carlos Ortiz had 18 world title fights, including 14 wins, 4 losses, no draws, and 11 title defences. Great champion was Carlos Ortiz. Now, on to number 74. Okay, it's a fighter who never held a title. Partially because Lesnievich didn't want another whipping. And partially because a number of other fighters probably didn't either. It is the fighter who I consider Black Murderers Row. He's not in the official Black Murderers Row, but he should be in Black Murderers Row, and I include him in mine. Jimmy Bivins. Now, Jimmy Bivins, okay, was a great fighter. Fought all the way from middleweight to heavyweight. Yes, he even had a version of a heavyweight career as a former middleweight. And you can tell looking at the picture, you know, if you look at him on the left-hand side, he looks so much smaller than the guy he's fighting, who is actually a heavyweight. So anyway, Jimmy Bivins beat 9 world champions. He fought 230 rounds against champions, and he beat 7 Hall of Fame fighters individually. 7 Hall of Famers he beat. Never had a title fight. He fought 178 rounds against Hall of Famers, and Bivins comes in with a total of 68 fights against rated opponents. Now, Bivins scored 31 knockouts, okay, 15 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 5 knockouts in the first round. Bivins was top 10 rated for nearly a decade throughout his career, a total of 9 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 27 fights. Now, Bivins was pound-for-pound rated for 2 years. He had 21 fights against pound-for-pounders, scoring 9 wins. He scored 3 wins against pound-for-pound top 3 fighters and 1 win against a pound-for-pound number 1 fighter. And Jimmy Bivins' opposition fought rate comes in at 6 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So Bivins had 25 fights against champions, including 10 wins, 14 losses, 1 draw, with 1 knockout. He had 19 fights against Hall of Famers, including 7 wins, 12 losses, no draws, with 2 knockouts, and he had 0 title fights. One thing what you've got to remember with Bivins, Pacquiao gets all the credit fighting bigger men. For the vast majority of Jimmy Bivins' career, that's all he did, fought bigger men. Okay, and to have the career he had is quite incredible and shows how good of a fighter he really was. So, from Jimmy Bivins in 74, let's go down to 73. Okay, to the Hermica Hurricane, a former sparring partner of the great Tony Canzoneri, who learnt a lot from Canzoneri and went on to be a great fighter himself, Lou Ambers. Very, very underrated, has very few defeats in over 100 fights. Really good fighter. And he learnt a lot from Canzoneri and later turned the screw on Canzoneri. But Ambers himself, okay, beat 8 world champions. He fought 166 rounds against champions. And Ambers beat 6 Hall of Fame fighters and fought a total of 171 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, Ambers had 39 fights against rated opponents. He scored 29 knockouts in his career, 11 in 3 rounds or less, and 1 in the first round. And Lou Ambers was top 10 rated for a total of 7 years. Now, his longest unbeaten run came to a total of 38 fights, and Lou Ambers was pound-for-pound rated for 4 years. Now, all in all, he had 20 fights against pound-for-pounders, scoring 12 wins. He scored 4 wins against pound-for-pound top 3 fighters and 4 wins against pound-for-pound number 1 fighters. And Lou Ambers' opposition fought rate comes in at 5 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So Ambers had 16 fights against champions. That included 10 wins, 5 losses, 1 draw, with 0 knockouts. He had 15 fights against Hall of Famers, including 8 wins, 6 losses, 1 draw, with 1 knockout. And he had 9 world title fights, Ambers, including 5 wins, 4 loss, no draw, and 3 title defences. And there he is actually on the right, pictured fighting his former legendary sparring partner, Tony Canzoneri. So, there we are at number 73. Let's go to fight number 72. Okay, and it is to a fighter who was one of the best lightweights in the world for a decade. Also one of the top contenders in the world for a decade. But sadly, was never even given a title shot again. Now, when you're a top contender for a decade and don't get a title shot, you know there's something amiss. You know, that'd be like Moses Itauma getting to like top 3 and then not getting a title shot for 10 years. I mean, that is crazy. So anyway, Wesley Ramey, beat 7 world champions. He fought 130 rounds against champions, and he beat 4 Hall of Fame fighters individually, fighting 71 rounds against Hall of Famers. Now, Ramey had 70 fights against rated opponents, 70. He scored 11 knockouts, 6 of them in 3 rounds or less, and 1 in the first round. And Wesley Ramey was top 10 rated for a total of 8 years. He had the longest unbeaten run of 23 fights, and Ramey was pound for pound rated for 1 year. Now, Wesley Ramey had 18 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 12 wins. He scored 0 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 0 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Wesley Ramey's opposition fought rate comes in at 8 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 6 from 13. So Wesley Ramey had 14 fights against champions, including 12 wins, 2 losses, no draws, and 0 KOs. He had 8 fights against Hall of Famers, including 5 wins, 3 losses, no draws, and 0 KOs. And he had 0 world title fights. And this is why, after this countdown, when people say, Charlo's not and Spencer are being given all opportunities and Golovkin's being denied opportunities, I just laugh at people like that. I'm like, you really don't know what you're on about, do you? There's so many fighters who had great careers who fought pals of Hall of Famers, pals of past or future champions, but the present champions wouldn't even give them a look in. So, you know, people expect me to cry and moan for a modern fighter who's only had 7 title fights in 5 years and apparently he's been denied opportunities. Well, this guy were a top 10 contender. He were a top contender for a decade. He never got 1 shot. So, you know, that's why I laugh at that kind of thing when I see it. But yeah, there's the great Wesley Ramey there. So, on to our next fighter, number 71. Another of the great bantamweights. We've had Kid Williams, we've had Joe Lynch. We already passed, just prior to top 100, the great bantamweight Pete Kidderman. Now it's time for another of my top 10 bantamweights of all time. Charles Bud Taylor. Now, Charles Bud Taylor, beat 7 world champions. He fought 214 rounds against champions. And Bud Taylor beat 5 Hall of Fame fighters, fighting a total of 184 rounds against Hall of Famers overall. Now, even though bulk of his career, he crossed that threshold, pre-rating and rating, so he has a slightly reduced, what is a reduced number of 54 rated fighters, got tongue-tied there. He scored 37 knockouts, 21 knockouts in 3 rounds or less, and 5 knockouts in the first round. Now, Charles Bud Taylor, was top 10 rated for a total of 7 years, and he had the longest unbeaten run of 14 fights. Bud Taylor was pound for pound rated in my all-time rankings for 2 years, and he had 25 fights against pound for pounders, scoring 11 wins. He scored 2 wins against pound for pound top 3 fighters and 2 wins against pound for pound number 1 fighters. And Charles Bud Taylor's opposition fought rate comes in at 7 from 18, and his opposition beat rate was 4 from 13. So, Charles Bud Taylor had 23 fights against champions, including 10 wins, 12 losses, 1 draw with 0 knockouts. He had 20 fights against Hall of Famers, including 6 wins, 11 losses, 3 draws with 0 knockouts. And he had 2 title fights, including 1 win, no losses, 1 draw, and 0 title defences. Interestingly, Charles Bud Taylor stopped a young Tony Canzoneri in Tony Canzoneri's first title challenge, which was for the NBA bantamweight title. Tony Canzoneri was a teenager, but he challenged Charles Bud Taylor and got beat. Now, the reason he got beat is Bud Taylor was too experienced for him, basically. He failed on first challenge, and then Bud Taylor, showed him meaning of Christmas, used his experience against him. Now, Canzoneri would beat him later, but that chance had been lost. Now, Canzoneri went on to set a world record, the youngest ever American world champion, when he captured a featherweight title. But had Charles Bud Taylor not denied him in that first shot, he would have been an even younger American world champion, Canzoneri. But yeah, Canzoneri did obviously come back and beat him later. But, Bud Taylor stopped the initial rapid rise of Tony Canzoneri, and then Canzoneri went to featherweight, and then titled there, of course, fighting fighters like Benny Bash, Johnny Dundee, then went on to lightweight, etc. So, yeah, the rest is history. But, it's... and Martin... Nice one, Bill. Glad I didn't get caught out again. Cheers. I know it's funny because both of you guys have missed the 11-0 there. One of you's been on and one on, and then the other's been on and one on. But then for the first 12, you are both here. Now, obviously, the fighters who scored those totals, 18 and 13, will be unveiled in the top 10. Okay, but you'll have to wait until then to find out. So, there's my latest video, 80 to 71. I will try and get another one done today if I can. In fact, I could probably do an immediate one now. But I'll see. Anyway, I'm the Boxing Librarian. I'm out for now.